Hello and welcome. This is the video on fake news and being investigators of the truth. It is the Investigators of the Truth series, episode number 2. It is for this quarter that I'm making it, and it might not always be this for all quarters, but it's assignment 10. If this is not fall quarter of 2020, please look in the notes. I am your host of Master Ceremonies, Chris Tower. That was Brian Eno, Sky Saw, which has been used as a BBC radio intro from the 1975 album Another Green World. I'm here today to talk to you about being investigators of the truth. This video will focus on credibility, facts and truth and bias, credentials, claims and false claims, fake news, hoaxes, and all things related. We're investigators of the truth, and this is episode 2 of the Investigators of the Truth series. Something to understand about writing a writing course at college is that it intends to be more than simply a course about writing in an academic way. It's also a course that promotes improving one's critical thinking skills and inspiring one to begin a journey as a lifelong learner. As such, it encourages you to think through complex problems and make personal choices about how you want to communicate with writing. Think about what you choose to learn and how you will communicate and what sources you will trust to properly inform you about what you learn and what you communicate. This is why we are investigators of the truth. This issue of fake news never used to be a thing. In the days of Edward Murrow, Walter Cronkite, and Dan Rather, we just let them deliver the news. We trusted that the facts were factually accurate and true. We knew that journalists held as a sacred oath to fact check their sources in multiple ways, to have more than one source for a story, to verify ones for which they could not have multiple sources, to do their best to validate that what they were reporting was true. We also knew that the people reporting news were human beings. We knew that they would make mistakes, and yet we also knew that when they made a mistake, they would issue a correction and or a retraction. Things have changed. And so to be investigators of the truth, we have to learn to navigate the minefield of mis and disinformation. But this fake news concept is not new to the 20th century, or excuse me, the 21st century. Yellow journalism or tabloid journalism spread misinformation and disinformation long before the current social media diaspora. This is why we have laws about slander and libel. And even before the yellow journalism practiced by the newsmongery of Joseph Pulitzer's New York World of 1833, or William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal and San Francisco Examiner, or starting around 1887, there were town criers, peddlers of gossip, and Roman plebes reading false proclamations in the street. The fourth estate of the news media have a code of ethics to regulate their behavior, and yet they have been instrumental in uncovering corruption, such as the famous takedown of Nixon's presidency, as Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward revealed, the criminal tampering with election campaigns at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. in the early 70s. As such, professional and educated journalists adhere to a code of ethics to maintain accuracy, independence, impartiality, integrity, harm minimization, engagement, and accountability. Of course, as you probably assume, there is a society of professional journalists who prescribe the code, who monitor each other and censure violators. Journalists have always attempted to uphold these principles, and beyond those, to be objective by being fair, disinterested, factual, and non-partisan. However, that credo of journalists, especially objectivity, is changing, and we must be mindful of changes as investigators of the truth. Cable TV took its cues from talk radio and began this change, involving itself in many of the same practices that made yellow journalism that sickly yellow color. Many cable TV channels work outside journalistic ethics and deliver something more like entertainment than ethical and objective news. With the advent of social media, clickbait have become the new lurid headlines to stoke your outrage, play on your fear, and make you paranoid, disaffected, and distrustful, while also making you loyal to their brand. Only they supply the truth. In the last 5 years, this manipulation of public attention and belief systems has become increasingly more toxic, fueling wild conspiracy theories and promoting false accusations and possibly true or actually true news reporting. Some networks invent problems that are not problems, such as Bill O'Reilly's fabricated war on Christmas. For instance, does Starbucks hate Jews? I totally said that. For instance, does Starbucks hate Jesus for decorating coffee cups with Christmas colors and the company logo and no other iconography? This war on Christmas is not new. The Puritans actually banned Christmas celebrations in the 17th century. One reason people fled to America, though the puritanical suppression followed them, and Christmas bans were part of American history in the early 1600s. And yet every year in office, Bill O'Reilly criticized Obama. So every year that Obama was in office, Bill O'Reilly criticized him for not mentioning Christmas by name in his annual holiday card, heedless of the idea of separation of church and state secured by the First Amendment of the Constitution, and the fact that 58.2% of the population of the US of A do not identify as Christian. With a population of 328.2 million people as of 2019, that's approximately 190 million people that do not identify as Christian and would not send out Christmas cards. Perhaps not a war, but a simple acknowledgement that more than half of the citizens of the country may not celebrate Christmas as a religious holiday. TV news shows just want to keep you watching, so you see more ads and buy stuff. It's not always about news or even truth. In fact, quite often, what is presented is completely untrue. And yet, when we polled students about where they find fake news, we received results such as, it's all fake, and the naming of nearly every major news outlet, including some of the most respected news organizations in the world, such as the New York Times and the Washington Post. The divisiveness in our nation has also perpetuated this idea that the news media is a secret society, a cabal of liberal thinking people who hate Christmas, hate guns, hate freedom, and want government programs that pay for everything with your tax dollars. They are characterized as peddling misinformation, fraud, hoaxes, and in all ways lacking in credibility. In fact, one government official accuses newspapers and networks of fake news anytime they criticize him at all. This mindset is a problem. We want to work out this problem. We want to be investigators of the truth. But if we are dedicated to the truth, then we have to believe that there are others who are also dedicated to the truth. The accusations hurled lately at journalists, writers, critics of culture, of history, of politics, accusations that they invent hoax after hoax, that they foment witch hunts, are a machine of piston-like repetition, much like the Lügenpresse, or lying press, the Nazi propaganda tactic to discredit the literally hundreds of German newspapers in the 1930s, the free press, the fourth estate. Though the term actually started back in 1847, long before the rise of Hitler. Germany recently branded Lügenpresse as a taboo word in 2015 in response to the anti-Islam movements such as Pegida, because like in America, trust in the mainstream media is on the decline in Germany. This is a very dangerous idea, because if there's no free press, then there is Newspeak from INGSOC in Oceania and the Ministry of Truth. There is just one source for information, state TV. Now, I have students that object to my introduction of history to the course, both this quarter and in other quarters. But we need the perspective if we're going to learn to think, to evaluate, to improve our dubious barometer, our doubt, our system for, invoking doubt and skepticism about sources, and to place our trust in some respected purveyors of information. For all of that, we must know the historical context of our current situation in our lives, in academia, and in our world. Those issues of truth and trust and skepticism are not just problems for us as writers in academia, trying to sort out credible sources from writers of impeccable credentials who have an accurate handle on reality from the miasma of misinformation, bias, and fraud. Let me say that again. These issues of truth and trust and skepticism are not just problems for us as writers in academia who are trying to sort out credible sources from writers of impeccable credentials who have an accurate handle on reality from the miasma of misinformation, bias, and fraud. But it's also a problem for us as humans, as citizens, as voters. Whom do we trust? On whom do we rely for our information? Though we can fact check information for an essay or a project in academia, we cannot fact check everything broadcast to us in an increasingly complex world of information and clickbait. We need to acknowledge that some sources are trustworthy while maintaining a critical eye to check our materials, especially those that seem unreasonable, biased, or potentially false. Luckily, we don't have to do this verification work on our own. There's assistance in the form of independent fact checkers and bias watchers. We also have to understand what we are reading. There's an appreciable difference between a peer-reviewed scholarly article and an article on BuzzFeed. There's a difference between a data analysis by someone who knows data and someone who misinterprets data on purpose to promote a narrative. And there's a huge difference between opinion and commentary and factual news and information. We should not expect opinion and commentary to be free of bias and objective. However, we should expect that news reporting is objective and moderately free of bias. Some sources more bias-free than others. So we can set aside TV news content as less credible than print journalism. That's pretty much a given. In other words, we should not even go to TV news content in academia, since we have print journalism content that is likely better fact-checked, less clickbaity, less based on advertisement, and in general more reliable. Yet some print journalism sources are more reliable than others. We can set peer-reviewed scholarly sources as the highest value of information, and yet even those are not free of bias and skewed information. If you want to look at one of the sources in the notes to this particular video, there is some criticism of peer-reviewed scholarly sources, but this is something we talk more about in English 102. And yet, believing smear campaigns by politicians against two of the most respected newspapers in the world with long histories and sterling reputations are also extremely problematic for us as thinkers and investigators of the truth, and just as humans trying to navigate the too much information world of modern 5G data-rich digital content. If we just look at Media Bias Fact Check, which is an independent media reviewer we can find out that they overall rate the New York Times as left center bias, just a little to the left of center, based on word and story selection that moderately favors the left, just a little bit, but highly factual and considered one of the most reliable sources for news information due to proper sourcing and well-respected journalists and editors. The failed fact checks for the New York Times that occurred were all on opinion editorial pieces or op-eds and not straight news reporting. Likewise, the Washington Post is also slightly left center, biased just moderately to favor the left, and also factually high due to proper sources and reasonable fact check records. The Washington Post was founded in 1877 and is currently owned by Amazon mogul Jeff Bezos. The New York Times was founded in 1851, which, by the way, is before the Civil War. The New York Times is controlled by the Ox-Sulzberger family through Class B shares, and since 1967, the company has been listed on the New York Stock Exchange under the symbol NYT. Class B shares are those that are held privately. So sure, longevity and ownership are not by themselves silver bullets that kill off accusations of fakery, but they are better indicators of long-term reputation and mindset than TV networks that may be only 25 years old, like Fox News, or 40 years old, like CNN, as compared to the Columbia Broadcast System, better known as CBS, established in 1929, NPR, established in 1970, or the BBC, established in 1922. For our purposes as investigators of the truth, it's best to stay away from the TV news networks because you can always find the same types of things in other news sources, such as newspapers, magazines, or even radio sources like NPR, though peer-reviewed scholarly sources are the highest value, but we typically don't ask you to use those in English 101. So let's think about how we evaluate sources. The old method was something known as the crap test. So here I'm going to switch to a graphic, which I should have had graphics all along, of course, but something called the crap test, right? I'm going to make myself a little bigger here and since we're on the recording. CRAP, C-R-A-A-P, an acronym for the steps you go through to evaluate a source. So first, C, is it current? Generally, you want current sources for your essays unless you have a particular reason to grab an older source and you use it aware that it's older and commenting on the fact that it's older. Otherwise, you want the most recent source possible, but it depends on your subject. Sometimes older sources are all that you have, or you need historical context or a variety of other reasons. But typically we're writing about things that are happening now, or we want the most recent research on something because we've learned things. If you use an article about polio before it was cured, that's really going to be not very meaningful, right? Also, is it relevant? Does the information actually relate to your subject? And who is the intended audience of the information? And one thing I've noticed repeatedly in student essays is students using material from articles that aren't in line with their thesis, but using the material from those, somehow taking quotes out of context to support their thesis, even when you look at the article and it's the opposite. And this is really not a good technique when you're using sources, So if you basically have a source for someone that's arguing the opposite of what you're arguing, and then you try to use something out of their article to support your position, it either means that you don't have another good source that supports your position, which is a problem, or you don't understand what the source is saying that you supposedly are using. Both of which are a problem. So current, relevant, authoritative, and this gets to the credentials of the people that publish it and the person that wrote it. And this is why we harp constantly on signal phrasing with credentials and signal phrasing with the information. Who wrote it? What is it from? What's it called? So like, what's the name of the author? What's the name of the title of the article? And some credentials of the author and or the place where it was published to lend that credibility. Is this person an expert or an authority on the subject? For instance, you know, if you're writing about the efficacy of eating vegetables in your diet, and you cite, you know, my blog, that's not a good authority. I'm not a nutritionist. What you want is a nutritionist. You should be citing a nutritionist. So is it current? Is it relevant? Is it authoritative? So is it written by an authority, which is why I have you choose sources written by people so that we can verify that they're authorities on the subject that they're writing about. Is it accurate? So are there mistakes in it of accuracy? Which means that sometimes you have to fact check, you have to corroborate, or have people fact check it for you, you know? So that's why the New York Times and the Washington Post are respected, because they fact check. Whereas a lot of television news doesn't fact check anymore at all, or very little, or ignores the fact check reports that they're given so that they can promote their narrative instead of the truth, which happens at television networks, particularly cable television networks. So again, better, you know, we have print sources, we don't really have to use the television. And then what's the purpose? What's the purpose of the source? You know, why was it created? And this goes back to what I said a few minutes ago, where students were often trying to use sources for a completely different purpose to support an opposite purpose that they have in their argument, you know. And this is also about bias, you know, is the source biased? You know, does it the people that are or person that's writing the source have an agenda? Does the people that are publishing the thing have an agenda? And so slightly left-leaning bias isn't an agenda. Extreme left, you know, bias to one side or the other is an agenda. And certainly, say, religious organizations, if you're trying to get information out of a religious publication about same-sex relationships, that they're, you know, by their doctrine, by their dogma and belief systems of their religion are against, like the Mormons, for example, you know, who oppose gay marriage, that's not a credible source, because they're in no way objective about that particular subject. And so those should be avoided. And you need that kind of critical lens when you're looking at sources. Now, in academia, we have developed a new system, and I say we in the grand we, even though it's not me, it's it's other people. But let me go to that. That's here. Don't have a cow, man. Hey, man, don't have a cow. So credentials, claims, objectives, worldview, cow. Pretty much the same things. Credentials of the people that wrote it, the claims that they're making, the objectives that they have, purpose, and then the worldview that they may have of bias or lacking in bias. So all of these resources are in the what do you call it? The notes. And I'm just going to throw in this one really quickly because it's fun. Except that it makes me search for it, and it is difficult to find. So there it is. What do you mean all my facts are wrong? I copied everything straight off the internet. Famous cartoon out there on the wild and woolly world of the internet for you to find stuff. So the point of these systems is to evaluate your information. As investigators of the truth, we want to best understand the sources we have selected for supporting our arguments or for arguing against as counterclaims to our arguments. So let me make sure that you got that. We're using sources to support our arguments because they agree with us, and they have evidence that we can use to support our arguments. Or, and usually often you have both. So it's really not one or the other, you have both. You have sources that are counterclaims, you know, so that you're using, so you can argue against them. And so often, you know, you want both. Can you tell the difference between a satirical source and a serious one? In other words, one that's totally humorous and not real, or one that is true or is purporting to be true. Can you discern hate news and extreme bias from sources trying to be objective, and though maybe a little biased, generally reasonable and fair? Let's take a look at another document here. And again, I have this in the notes that go along with this, and I recommend that you take some time to look at it. I'm giving you 2 links, but in the Canvas classroom, I got the full PDF that I'm about to show you here. But in the notes of this video, I have a shorter version and a longer, and this version is a longer version. It's 31 pages, but most of it is just sort of a chart that shows you the credibility of a variety of sources. So false, misleading, clickbaity, and or satirical news sources. So the first thing is it takes you through tips for analyzing news sources. So avoid those that end in LO, like newslow. Watch out for common news websites that end in .com, .co. Watch out if known or reputable news sites are also not reporting on the story. This is why we talk about corroborating something, you know. So if you find one source that's reporting on the story and nobody else is reporting on it, then likely that story is false. Now, some people would argue that, but that's a conspiracy theory thing, and we're not going to get into that. So there's lots of other things here: odd domain names, lack of author attribution, which is why I have you have authors. You know, there's issues with bloggers, despite the fact that I am one, and so on and so on. Bad web design, really angry, you know, and so on and so on. This is really good to look through and kind of think about, right? And then it gets into, you know, analyzing websites in particular, you know. So blogs are not super reliable because anybody can make one, you know. So there's and there's fact-checking sites, which we've talked about. Other than Media Bias Fact Check, there's also Snopes, Hoaxslayer, PolitiFact, factcheck.org, MediaMatters.org, et cetera, et cetera. So this kind of walks you through thinking about the analysis of various websites, source analysis, you know, writing style, aesthetics, social media, et cetera. And then there's some other tags that are given to fake news and satire and extreme bias and conspiracy theory and rumor mill and junk science and hate news and clickbait and so on. These are tags, I think, for their system. So then it goes through a whole bunch of them in here. You know, so if you come across one of these sites, you can check it. Here's, you know, barenakedislam.com is a hate site. Big surprise there. Beehive Bugle, on the other hand, is a satire site. Little less, you know, we would be able to tell from that, right? And so, you know, there's quite a bit. The more ads on a site, although this is not always a universal true thing, but the more ads, the more dubious I am, and I just don't want to be on the site because there's so many ads. But that's just me. So take a look at that. In the end, studying how we navigate the world of information, deciding who we trust, and making informed decisions about what we choose to accept And what we choose to reject is not just a useless academic exercise that has no application in the real world. I will never use this stupid geometry ever again. It's not necessarily like that. This process that we're engaged in builds critical thinking skills and a commitment to lifelong learning that is, well, lifelong. So now get busy. Be an investigator for the truth. The notes for this, show the things that I've said, links to a variety of things, the links to things I showed you. There's a variety of other sources as well that you can examine. And then the place where I put this video will explain what to do for the assignment. So you should definitely read that, because that may change quarter to quarter, and I may reuse these videos. So again, be busy, be an investigator for the truth. Thank you for taking the time to listen to and watch my video. See you later.